able to see that, so I will directly read the mission of our organization to you. We are a fiscally sponsored network of volunteers that puts together professional development opportunities for young professionals by young professionals. So our mission is that we ensure sustainable innovation. I should memorize this, in arts leadership by facilitating and providing a forum for preparing, educating, and inspiring emerging arts professionals to assume the next generation of arts sector leadership positions. So, by a show of hands, for how many people is this your first Emerging Arts Leaders event? Yay! Round of applause. And let's do, by a show of hands, how many people have been to so many Emerging Arts Leaders events that they've lost count? Yay! By a show of hands, who is on the Leadership Council for the Emerging Arts Leaders of Los Angeles? Yay! So I just want everyone who's new here to feel welcome and feel that you have a lot of resources of people that have been to so many things they can't remember. So you have a lot of people to talk to and join this fabulous cult. Okay. That was just the Halloween and the Raven speaking. Sorry. We're not a cult. Hit it. All right. So if you're new to EALLA, you can go to ealla.org to register for a profile. That makes you an official member and also gets you on our mailing list. So if you heard about this other than from an email from Emerging Arts Leaders, I really encourage you to sign up so that you'll know about all of our cool happenings. You can pick up, that's okay. You can pick up a one sheet at the front or just talk to any people that has been here so long and we'll make sure you get hooked into the next event. So up there, Shayna Keller, who is in the audience, Shayna. Shayna is a participant in our Arts Professional Advisors Link program, which is a mentorship program that I describe as kind of a book club. You can have a mentor and that's great, but when you're in a group of people that have a mentor, you can benefit from their mentorship experience, and that's what our APAL program is all about. We're going to have applications become available next month, November, and I'm going to embarrass Shayna and read a quote by her about her experience. The program has provided a strong platform for networking with both peers and established leaders in the arts and cultural sector, and has fostered a strong sense of camaraderie among members of our cohort. My mentor's guidance has been integral to my professional development this year. So that is a free program lasting a year. I'm happy to answer questions. Shayna's happy to answer questions. You will get an email about our mentorship program in November if you do sign up for a profile. We have events coming up. We are going to start planning for our April Creative Conversation, which is the event that you're at today in November. You guys will see an email about that. We have a finance workshop coming up on November 7th. Jen Borman can tell you about that. She's raising her hand in the corner there. We have a marketing and membership committee meeting. Gavin, when?
The 14th at 7.
The 14th at 7. And so once you join our list, you'll get all these emails. You don't have to memorize everything. I just want to tell you there's lots of ways to get engaged. We have a mixer coming up in January. We have a branding workshop coming up in January. I have to look up there. There's just a lot of stuff happening. All right. And then also we are on Twitter today. In a moment, we'll pull up our tweet chat on this screen. You guys can log in to tweetchat.com and follow the conversation at #CCLA12, and our handle is EALLA.org. So if you want to tweet today, feel free. If you just want to kind of follow the conversation, also feel free. If you do tweet, @tag us to make us look really cool. I don't know. All right, so one more thing. If you have a great experience today, we like to keep our website live. We like to have people read about your experience. So you can blog today. Crystal, raise your hand. Ryan, raise your hand. They're front and center. They want to hear about your experiences. So if you're inspired today and want to write a blog post about it, let them know and we'll get that up on our website. It's good to put in your resume that you are an active blogger. So it's professional development for you. And before we hunker down and learn, we do have a happy hour today. We're going to start here. We've got some wine and hors d'oeuvres. So at 4 p.m. when we conclude, stick around. And then if the party just can't stop, we'll move over to the Griffin at the Atwater on Los Feliz. And there is a map in your program, so no excuses to not come. So that's all of my announcements. If you didn't catch any of that, just catch me, and I would love to just make you guys feel welcome and get our day started. So I'd love to introduce first our keynote speaker, John Malpede from the LA Poverty Department.
Okay, so the hi everybody. The LA Poverty Department, for people who probably don't know, is it's a performance group based in Skid Row, Los Angeles, that I started 27 or 28 years ago. And the thing about that was, I was, for you guys, mass homelessness also started about 28 or 30 years ago. Like up until the 80s. How many people were alive in 1980? Yeah, you're all like 3 years old or something, with a few exceptions. But anyway, nowhere in America were there lots of people lying on the streets, So something changed after that, and public policy changed. And suddenly, the cost of housing became disconnected from any kind of program that would keep people inside, no matter how poor, no matter how out of it they might be. So that created a situation where suddenly, I remember I was living in New York, and I walked down the street in the middle of the winter in about 1983, and there was a big old Cadillac with big fins with the top down, a convertible, and there was a guy sleeping in it, and it was snowing on him. So I hadn't seen stuff like that before, So I got interested in making a performance, because I was a performance artist, about homelessness. It took me out here, and in 1984, right before the Olympics, I discovered that the LA was known as the homeless capital of America, specifically Skid Row, which is in downtown, just east of Main Street. Do you know, how many people hang out in downtown? A lot of people, okay. So one thing led to another, and within a year I was living out here, and I started volunteering for a legal clinic that was dealing with homeless issues. And they gave me a job. Suddenly I went from being an artist to being a paralegal, working on the streets, and going to all the welfare offices in LA County to see if people were getting what they were legally entitled to. And then when the lawyers weren't around, we used to kick out the desks at the office down on San Pedro Street and start doing performance workshops, which seemed like a really dubious proposition to me, actually. But a lot of people flooded in because it was an opportunity to do something, and there were a lot of people who showed up with their screenplay that had never been read by anybody, or their 12 rap songs that no one ever listened to. And so, so it was all interest, and we had to figure out how to make this all go on. And so improbably, LA Poverty Department still exists, and in fact, today and tomorrow, at this moment I'm avoiding setting up for, but other people are doing it, the Festival for All Skid Row Artists, which is something we started about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's just what it says. It's not just for people in our group. It's not particularly at all for people in our group. We're the ones who are like, those are the guys who are doing all the setup actually when I'm over here, and but it's for anybody in the neighborhood to get up and perform. So I know you guys are all busy today, but you should check it out tomorrow. It's really a low key and an awesome and fun event. And it's on the corner of 6th and Gladys, and there are a bunch of these around, so you can grab one. They'll be out front afterwards. And this festival really came out of, it was a consequence of a paper that I wrote with Americans for the Arts, which I guess are also connected with you guys. They had asked, they had a few different groups around the country on different levels, like an arts council in Tucson and an individual artist in New York and our group here in LA, writing papers about, with scholars around the impact of grassroots cultural activity. And Maria Rosario Jackson and I, who was here from the Urban Institute, I said, she was working with us, and I said, well, I don't want to do anything about LAPD's, I don't feel it's worth writing something about how LAPD adds value to the neighborhood. I think we should just use the cred that LAPD has to look at culture in the neighborhood generally. And, and so we wrote this paper, and there's also a bunch of pieces of paper out there with the link if you want to read that paper. And I think Stephanie said she'd already sent it out to you guys some earlier moment. But anyway, what we found out is that, the culture comes from the ground up in Skid Row. And it's mainly, it's mainly from just people doing stuff. Some stuff is initiated by organizations, nonprofits, but none of them are arts organizations. They're like, other kinds of organizations. So LAMP, the Center for People with Mental Histories, Men and Women, does an arts workshop. And Lillian Carl Murray, working for SRO Housing, does an arts workshop and stuff like that. But more and more, as the neighborhood is congealed, the initiatives are coming from the people who live in the neighborhood, like the Skid Row Players, which is a drumming group, and guys that are working with us today, and an OG man who started a bunch of different initiatives, from providing trash cans for the neighborhood since there weren't any there, and they'd all been taken away, and he started just buying plastic trash cans and getting people to paint on them, and he called it the Funky Trash Can Program. So anyway, so we, this paper was really about placemaking. The Skid Row Artist Festival is also about placemaking. A lot of the stuff we've been doing is about that. Even before placemaking was a word, right? Because from the beginning, the whole idea of LAPD was to create community on Skid Row and get life on Skid Row out to Normalville. That was get the real deal of life on Skid Row out to Normalville. So that meant really representing the neighborhood from the point of view of the people living in the neighborhood. And so those, so now we'd say, oh, that's all placemaking activity, and the issue, well, okay, a couple of things. One is, a lot of talk around creative placemaking is that it's a good thing because it solidifies social networks, and that's really, really true. And in Skid Row, like I said, I came out there and started working for a law clinic, and then out of that grew LAPD, and then out of that grew something else, and that's the law clinic itself grew out of the Catholic Worker. So really, the one thing has begat another, and it's just strengthened not only the cultural network, but just the social network of Skid Row, to the point that it really is. Well, it's really the biggest recovery community anywhere. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that came to be in a minute. But the other things that people talk about in terms of creative placemaking are like branding a neighborhood or branding a spot, or creating a perception or an image of the spot. And that's definitely something that we're interested in doing, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later too. And then the third thing, of course, is people say, it creates economic development, and that's a little vaguer, and especially in the case of Skid Row, because Skid Row. Okay, here I go into a little bit of history. When they built Bunker Hill, the high-rise skyline of downtown, there used to be. Anybody know what Bunker Hill used to be? What? Yeah, it was residential. It had originally been like fancy old Victorian houses and stuff, and then later on it became boarding houses. Some of those places were broken up and apartment buildings were built. So it was a low to moderate income neighborhood, known as the residence of John Fante, for example, who was an LA novelist, and then when when it was redeveloped, they did it like mountaintop removal. They just flattened the top of Bunker Hill, knocked everything down, flattened the top, and built all these these edifices that are up there now, right? And as part of that redevelopment plan, some of the money, the development money went to the CRA, Community Redevelopment Agency, which has recently been disappeared by the governor due to the budget, because here's why. Because redevelopment agencies in California, which no longer exist, were set up in the 40s or the 50s, so that when an area was developed like Bunker Hill, the additional taxes received from that development would not be given to the general fund of the city and the state, but they'd be put aside for other blighted areas that were in redevelopment. So that meant there was money for developing, and part of that money was destined for low-income housing and stuff like that. So it allowed them to build other, replace the housing they knocked down somewhere else and stuff like that. So, but what happened? So then there was another plan for further further redevelopment area in the rest of downtown. And there was a plan called the Silver Book Plan, which basically followed the same sort of model as the Bunker Hill Plan, which was knock it down and build something new. And then some people, Jeff Dietrich, the Catholic Worker, Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, who I used to work for, and the Community Design Center. This is in the early 70s when I was not around. They submitted another plan called the Blue Book Plan. And the Blue Book Plan proposed to save the housing in a 55 square block area, which is Skid Row. So from Main to Central and 4th to 7th. And to save that housing, because it was the cheapest housing in LA, it was a bunch of single room occupancy hotels in private ownership in terrible condition, but fully occupied. Yeah. And to relocate services like the missions, for example. At that time the Union Rescue Mission was right next to St. Bibiana's on 2nd and Main. So what happened over the ensuing years is Union Rescue Mission went downtown, and the Archdiocese went uptown. Right, it went up to Bunker Hill and Temple and Grand. And so anyway, so this area. So surprisingly, it was the beginning of Tom Bradley's administration, and the CRA was run by a guy named Ed Helfeld, who was very progressive. Surprisingly, this Blue Book Plan passed. So unlike in many cities where the poorest part of the city with the lowest income housing, the Skid Row area, had been completely obliterated, in Los Angeles that area was saved, and it was called a containment plan, which has obvious negative consequences. It was like, really part of it was, okay, let's separate this from the rest of the city, and let's move people off of, let's get people out of Pershing Square, let's try and move people down, let's move the services down. So, but on the other side, it preserved the housing, and it preserved the services in that area, and a lot of those. So what happened subsequently is virtually all of the hotels were taken over by nonprofits. The first one, SRO Housing, was created by the CRA, and all that miserable housing was transformed into safe, affordable, decent housing, and subsequently more of it has been built. And again, like the missions moved down into that area, but they also had much, because they had old, sort of like old funky loft stuff, and then they had large, spanking new accommodations for more people, including women, and they have, all kinds of gyms and computers and different kinds of programs and stuff like that. So that was the trade-off that allowed Skid Row to exist and to become sort of a social laboratory, and which has resulted in it becoming the biggest recovery community anywhere. And because the programs the free programs for people coming out of getting getting clean and sober, or transitioning out of incarceration, or coming out of domestic abuse, or dealing with mental illness or PTSD, homeless vets and all that. All that stuff is in that neighborhood. And what happens is many people, for a variety of reasons, a couple of reasons. One is it still is the most affordable place to live, but also because of the recovery consciousness that's in the air there. People graduate from those programs, they stay in the neighborhood, they get jobs working in the hotels or working in the missions or doing other stuff, working for the social service agencies, so that there's sort of a vibe in the neighborhood. There's still like people, doing drugs on the street and stuff like that, but there's also a huge, very sophisticated recovery vibe in the neighborhood of people who, live and work there. And people say, you get clean and sober in a recovery program, but you live recovery every day in your regular life. So it's, like I said, it's an extraordinary resource for the entirety of Southern California. And you hear stories about people being dropped off on Skid Row from hospitals and police departments and other cities who don't want people to. But the reality is that that obviously is deplorable, right? But the deal is that it is a special resource that should be and could be valued by not only people living there, but by everybody else, And but what's happened is, not everybody does value that neighborhood, and in fact, it still exists in a spot that is very, it's valuable real estate, right? It's in the center of the city. So even though that plan is still in effect, the Blue Book plan is still the plan in effect, meaning that from Main Street to Central and 4th to 7th is the Skid Row neighborhood that is about recovery. That doesn't mean that there haven't been challenges to the neighborhood, or there isn't a constant push and shove around the future, the present and the future of the neighborhood. So a lot of the work that we've been doing, with the festival, with this paper, and also, if you see that that image up there, perhaps at the end, I brought a little video about this project we did last spring, which was called Walk the Talk, and it was about 36 people and initiatives. It was really an epic history of Skid Row. It was about 36 people and initiatives who, over the last 40 years, going back to the Blue Book plan and even before, people living and working in the neighborhood who had done things, created initiatives that had transformed the neighborhood, created community, created a sense of place. And so we realized the project by most of those people who were alive came to LAPD rehearsal, and we interviewed them, we videoed it. We did a real cumbersome way of doing it, and then we have a 20-page transcript of what they said, and then we reduced that to 4 pages. And then we had a script that was 4 times 36, a lot of pages, and we went out into the neighborhood with a brass band, and also, I don't know if you can see it, but the images of these 36 people, and that we eventually want to have as permanently installed in the neighborhood. And we had a brass band. We traveled down the street for 3 days, and we stopped in front of the spots associated with all these people, and we did this 10-minute performance of their words by a group of us. And sometimes those people were there with us, and sometimes they weren't. And then we went on to the next spot. And so it turned out to be a lot of fun. Actually, it turned out to be a really great thing. And but it was another project about representing the neighborhood, the fact that there is a neighborhood, a permanent neighborhood, a long-standing neighborhood that has a lot of cultural assets. And the project we're working on right now actually is about the history of the recovery community, called Biggest Recovery Community Anywhere, and we're going to be, we're making a show now about that, and again, that we're having a film series. We're looking at different recovery movies in the community, and then we're going to have a visual arts component with archival material from the Dr. Bob Archive, which is at Brown University. He's one of the first, takes two people to tango in 12-step program, so he and Bill W. did that tango initially. So we're having his coffee pot and other things are going to be on in the next edition. Anyway, what I want to do with you guys is I wanted to show the video, and we will do that at the end, but what I also wanted to do is I wanted to, rather than talking all the time, I wanted to sort of look at stakeholders in downtown LA, and I want to divide up in 7 groups. So each group will represent a group of stakeholders in downtown LA, and then you can either embrace your own point of view, or you can embrace a completely fictive point of view. And in each one of those groups, for the most part, I think I've laid out at least 2 points of view that are distinct and different within that group, and so you can sort of choose to be a person representing one of those groups and one of those points of view. And then, so we'll take like 10 or 15 minutes in the groups where you sort of like you can sort of develop your point of view and lay it out. Like again, whether it can either be a real point of view or you can take some point of view that isn't yours at all. And but you just have to go for it, yeah. And I'll run around and check in with each group and stuff like that. And then afterwards we'll reconvene at a little neighborhood planning meeting, and I have a couple agenda items that I'll spring on you, and we can address, again representing the position you've developed. We can grapple with those particular issues for a little bit of time. So that's the plan.
So we should break down into groups of 7.
Yeah, but maybe I think I'll go over the positions. Stephanie has like a paper that explains all the positions, but I'm going to go over them quickly, and then yeah, and then anyway, okay. So the first group is Main Street residents. So in other words, people who have moved into downtown, right? And so here's what I claim to say here. Let's see, people living and working in downtown because they like the urban vibe, access to transportation, culture, other urban amenities, and the comparatively low rents relative to other parts of the city. And then here are positions for those folks. People who appreciate urban grit and diversity, and those who view grit and diversity as negatively impacting their quality of life. So in other words, right now that we're looking at sort of not just Skid Row, but a greater downtown, but we're considering the possibility that these two might be part of the same entity. We're looking at them as part of the same entity. And I know I was in preparation for this. I was reading a thing by Mark Stern and about what naturally occurring cultural districts or something like that. And and it turns out, according to them, he and Sally Seifert, I think, where there's where there's professional people and people living in poverty bumping up against one another, that is the ideal recipe for creativity. So that's what we're looking at, okay? And then there's the Central City Business District, which is the business district for above Main Street. And they wear, I don't know what color shirts they wear, maybe purple, but anyway. And so here's the positions that they're interested in creating separation between the historic core and Skid Row. They would like to see Skid Row east. And positions, maintain Skid Row east of Los Angeles, or 2, and this is something that was actually got a lot of traction before the financial bust. Not necessarily with these guys, but in the Board of Supervisors, for example, this was talked about. displacing the services and permanent low-income residential community to the far reaches of the county. So at that moment, prior to 2008, when the bubble burst, the county, the city, everybody was flush with money. And they thought, some people thought, well, a really good idea would be to take all the services in Skid Row and move them to Lancaster and other faraway spots and replicate the services, which of course couldn't have really been done except for by spending 5 times as much money as here, because then you'd have, it would be all dispersed and you'd have to do 5 times as much. Anyway, those are the positions I'm attributing to the central city business district, whether they're right or not. And then there's the Central City East Business District, which is a different group below San Pedro Street. And the deal is San Pedro sort of is in the middle of Skid Row. Their business district is below, and below there's been a moratorium on building new residential construction. You can't do it. All the new hotels that the nonprofits are building are above that. But I went to a meeting that the CRA had actually a couple of years ago before they were disappeared, and the agenda item on the table was whether to begin to rezone that neighborhood so that people could build there. So this is a live topic of the future. So anyway, the Central City East Business District is a lot of fish packers between San Pedro and Central Street, and also the Toy District, which is below Los Angeles Street. And here are the positions I attributed to these guys. Ignore existence of residential community and criminalize people living on the streets and in hotels, and resist further development of housing below San Pedro Street. So this has actually been a very strong position within the Central City East Association. They really try to say this is their turf, and there's not. They try to ignore the residential hotels that have been there and are still there. And then 2, reach accommodation, a different position, reach accommodation with current low-income residential community that acknowledges their concerns, and even allows for building new low-income housing in exchange for a united position with them against building market-rate housing east of San Pedro Street, because market-rate people certainly wouldn't want to coexist with smelly fish packaging factories. So it gets complex, right? People's interests, there are a lot of interests here. And then the nonprofit social service and housing providers. And again, within that sector, there's also a diversity of opinion. People interested in expanding services, generally. Some are interested in developing revenue streams through integrating with Main Street, for example, setting up retail sales, a coffee shop, a gift store, which the new Downtown Women's Center has in their beautiful new building. B, offering affordable housing to working people for $1,100 a month, more or less, instead of $100 a month for Skid Row residents, which had been their mission. So slightly looking at having mixed housing that has affordable housing, but for working low-income people, as opposed to just people who are on, you have housing because of subsidies and SSI or disability benefit or county welfare or whatever, Section 8. So here are the 2 positions. 1, integration with Main Street, and 2, people that I didn't write this very well, but the idea is the opposite point of view. Here it says integration with Main Street as first step in disappearance of Skid Row services and residents. So in other words, some people, like Alice Callahan, for example, who's been one of the most important people in advocating for housing in downtown, feels that opening the housing to low income but not super low income people is the first step towards it's a slippery slope that will end up in the disappearance of the whole neighborhood. So then there's grassroots residents and advocate groups, in other words, permanent residents, and they are interested in a parity of municipal services. So if there are trash cans on Main Street, let's have trash cans on Skid Row. If they clean the streets there, let's do it here. Let's have a park, let's have trash collection, let's have cultural and meeting spaces, even markets, even a restaurant, even stores. I was just talking to someone on the street today who was talking about opening up a restaurant on Skid Row, someone who lives in the neighborhood. Safety, not harassment, foot patrols of police in the neighborhood to keep it safe, and the preservation of the housing. And housing for families. That's something that a lot of people living in the neighborhood want. It's always been, most of the advocates even have tried to get families off of Skid Row, but a lot of people living there want it. So, and a cultural space. So here's positions. Positions with the one is, let's have a state-of-the-art cultural facility on Skid Row, or let's have a cluster of independent creative storefronts throughout the neighborhood. And then the city council mayor, position number one would be maximum development of the entire area, including building market rate housing east of San Pedro Street. So again, that whole rezoning is in play. Or supporting the area as the way it is now as a recovery zone, preserving the area exclusively for low-cost housing and services to support personal transformation. And then I've included the police department as a stakeholder, and the positions there would be community policing, foot patrols, building personal ties with neighborhood residents as a way of supporting neighborhood safety, or two, the Safer Cities Initiative, which is the current policy that brought in an additional 50 officers to the neighborhood, operating on a broken windows theory of policing, aggressively policing minor offenses like jaywalking, so that people are given jaywalking tickets in LA, in Skid Row, 65 times as often as any other part of Los Angeles. Arresting people for stolen milk crates and things like that, as a way of maintaining public order. So the broken windows philosophy is that if you do that, then people won't do serious crime. So that's the current policy. So anyway, those are the positions. So in other words, if you're in the police group, you could be a police officer saying, well, wait, I think we should actually flip over to doing more foot patrols, community policing, getting to know the people, be out in the neighborhood, and other people might say, no, the broken windows theory, we're still down with that, and that's really the way to go, right? So again, you can have as much. The important thing is to powerfully advocate for whatever position you decide to do. It doesn't have to be your own position. Let's make sure we cover all the positions. Okay? So that's it. Break up into groups. I'll come around. You start developing and articulating your positions. I'll come around and encourage you and clarify anything that's not clear. Okay, let's call this meeting to order. So No, so we're welcome to this this significant planning meeting of the downtown community, and I'm Larry. I'm not going to say Larry Mantle from. I'm Larry somebody else from Larry Greenleaf from Jose Huizar's office, and I'm facilitating the meeting. So we have a lot of items on the agenda, but we're just going to check out one before lunch here today. And that is, there's been a lot of conversation about the rezoning of the industrial neighborhood below San Pedro Street to allow residential development. So that's what we want to look at. Should the zoning be changed to allow residential development? As you know, or maybe don't know, at the moment, there are a number of residential hotels there that have been there for a long time. The Ford, the Ellis, the Regal, a bunch of others. And so several thousand people are permanent residents of that neighborhood. At the same time, there hasn't been any further construction of residential units in that neighborhood, and now we're looking at whether perhaps it's a good idea to change that policy and allow residential development. And then, if we do, is that development only going to be for people of the very low income nature that the housing in the neighborhood has been for, or should we allow more mixed income housing in that neighborhood, and as a way of creating a more diverse and economically viable neighborhood. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. Everybody, when you stand up, you can identify yourself either fictively or some other way, and say what your position as a stakeholder is in downtown and what your point of view is on this issue. And then okay. 1, 2, 3, go. Yeah, well, no, it's not, like I said, it's individuals. Even though you were in a group, even though you are a stakeholder group, you're an individual. So as many people from one group can go. It doesn't have to be all the groups. You're just individuals at this meeting. Go ahead, stand up and speak out.
I'm Elizabeth Van Vleck, and we are part of the Central City East Business District, and we sort of identified that it's a very complex issue for which we don't have a plethora of information. However, we did speak about, and we sort of came to consensus on a few things, but one was that we would like to keep it as is, not to bring in a fair market value residential situation, because it might actually end up pushing us out, and then where would we go? And in terms of trying to do good by the city, we want the city's help. If we were gonna, I don't know, help me out here. We were thinking of an idea of offering training for people that are already on Skid Row and helping and possibly employing them in the future, and using that as a sort of marketing tool for our businesses as well.
That's a very good idea, and one that I haven't heard from your group before. What's that?
We're progressive fish packers.
That's really good. So now this is the moment for public comment. After that, if the decision hasn't already been made, it will be made after this meeting. So this is the time for the community to get involved and voice your opinion about this issue.
Well, representing one of the historical theaters downtown, I think it's very important that we allow the creativity of this area to come forth, because some of these theaters from the 20s and are great historic cultural places that are not being seen by many people, not being enjoyed by near the number of people who used to back when they were popular. We would like to revitalize that. And so I think that it would be helpful to not limit the type of housing to allow people of diverse income levels to start coming back into the area and revitalizing it.
Thank you, yeah. Okay, what other, who else wants to speak to this issue? Yes.
I'm Sergeant Jake Stockwell from the Parker Center. None of you people have been down there.
Good to see you, Jay.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is all great, whatever. But here's the thing: who's gonna keep these people who now want these fancy apartments safe when we have one of the highest per capita crime and petty up the felony crime districts in the country? You guys have no idea. I mean, it's a mess down there. It's a mess. So I mean, all right. I don't
So are you talking about Skid Row? I didn't realize it was such a high crime area.
Yeah, it's terrible. That's what I had there too. It's right there. It's right by Stampede East where you don't want to do your thing.
Yes.
Well, I represent the nonprofit community downtown, and I take umbrage a little bit at the description of the neighborhood as being a big hot mess. But we have to agree with the whatever you guys, fish packers. It's hard enough to pay the rent, and in order for us to keep operational, we can't be driven out by the kind of mixed-use market rate fluctuations that would come in if we allow the community to become, a high-end loft and coffee shop and restaurant.
Okay. Yes, other members of the public. Yes.
I'm just thinking,
Are you also with the police department?
no, not right now. I'm just a member of the public.
Okay.
I'm someone that would go to the police. So what I want to know is if I'm going to come and conduct commerce with a fish packer, how safe I'm going to be. I want to know how safe commercial interests are.
Well, I'm sorry, could you be a little louder? I couldn't quite hear you.
I want to know how safe it will be for me to conduct commerce with a fish packer.
Oh, so you think there's something unsafe about the fish packing industry?
Where they're located.
What's that?
Where they're located. So, I've got to cruise these streets and by feet, and I want to know whether, if they try to incorporate people from Skid Row into their workforce. How safe is it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you're worried, you're concerned about that?
Buy fish for the restaurant?
Okay. Yes.
All right. I'm from a nonprofit social service and housing provider group, and a little bit different twist on this, coming up with creating mixed use, but developing it from the inside out. In other words, setting up private-public partnership to not entirely dependent upon government, and we all know where that's going. But private financing with government support of a economic enterprise zone, if you will, an economic development where it's a cooperative model where the residents of, we were looking at Skid Row or wherever we are talking about, that they're training, that there's training and responsibility and their co-ownership and cooperative ownership. So they are investing, there's an investment in them and an investment that they make within the businesses. So that the idea and the goal would be not necessarily integration, but transaction and exchange. The people who can afford to buy something from these businesses that can be created out of that community, that money goes to them. There's an exchange. and not a co-optation. So in other words, it's not an either-or kind of proposition. We'll stay poor, we'll create a ghetto, we'll be comfortable with each other, and we'll have a cultural identity of our own, but we're going to be living in the streets, or we're living in an SRO situation, and I don't think that's the goal of anybody's life. So the idea is not either or we'll come in with the cafe cannoli and the lattes, and that does co-opt. I mean, that's definitely a co-optation. So if that's not integration, that's replacement of co-op. But you need another economic model. And so that's what the nonprofit community needs to start thinking out of the box. So that's another twist that is arising out of this book.
But with regard to whether there should be a change in the zoning to allow residential below San Pedro, do you think this might work in the context of this setup you're suggesting could work, make that a viable situation? So.
I guess I'm not real sure. I mean, I was really thinking of it being that there'd be a commercial development that involves the residents of.
Well, in other words, if you're.
We were talking about Skid Row. So.
Yeah. So in that area, which is Skid Row, if there was market rate housing or allowed to develop in that area, then you're saying like rather there should be some mechanism that prevents it being a place where there's a lot of latte as opposed to something else that would feed the that would also be of interest to people within and would support them. Okay. Yes.
I'm a fish packer, but I'm more I feel like I like the idea of there being a new economic model, but that I would like to see first a new educational model that addresses the heritage of these areas. If the fish packing district is known to the community at large, if this is the fish packing district, and if the historic theaters are known through all of Los Angeles, that here's where historic theaters are, then it shouldn't matter if there's, free market housing a mile and a half east of the theater district. People across Los Angeles should know that that's where they can go to find historic theaters, and if they're not taking advantage of it now, I don't know what bringing them not that close to the area, is that how that's going to help? Sorry, am I being clear at all?
Yes, you are. Yeah. Okay, so we have time for one more question, and then the city council is going to take these findings and make a decision about this, about whether they go forward with the rezoning. Yes.
I am an artist in the downtown area, and we'd like to see some more of our creative concerns addressed, either through a really large institution, really beautiful, kind of like the California Endowment for the Arts, and we want a space, we'd like some place that we can go to and feel represented by the arts. And we'd like to have that as a central space for us to grow and have the arts serve as a solution for a lot of our economic challenges, housing, galleries, and to come up with maybe some creative solutions as to how we can have more affordable housing where we're not considered low income just because we're artists.
So how does that cut with regard to the issue on the table right now, which is about developing housing below St. Peter's Street?
We would like to somehow find some creative solutions so we can have both low income and artists perhaps living together simultaneously as part of the solution, or somehow having this large institution supporting us, supporting the arts, supporting those who still want to give creative efforts to the downtown Skid Row area.
Okay, thanks. Oh, one burning last comment, and then we're taking this to committee. Go ahead.
Oh, you want, okay. Okay, experience in every city, and I'm an artist, so, but the experience in every city around is that artists are the spearhead of economic development but economic development in the sense of gentrification of an area. So that I think it's, again, I'm just going to keep arguing for that it's great having artists and poor people live together, which is generally what happens. I mean, Soho is a perfect example of that. What happens when, that develops. And so that's why I'm arguing for the area to have, or attention be placed on the area to develop economically from within.
Okay, thank you. So that's it. And we're really over time here, so we're going to stop. And, yeah. Oh yeah, there's a video of it, which if you listen carefully, it tells the history of all this stuff about the Blue Book Plan and blah, 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 and the development of grassroots cultural institutions on Skid Row. It's about 12 minutes. There's a lot of music. You don't necessarily, well, whatever. We can play it. And,
You can play it during lunch for those
what?
that would like
Yeah, you can play it during lunch if people want to check it out. And then, but if you want to tomorrow, grab a flyer and come down and check out the Festival for All Skid Row Artists. Okay, doke. Thanks, everybody.
Please join me.
So I thought this morning's session was wonderful, and I know that John thanked you guys for your the giving quality. Everyone was really contributing, and that's great. We sparked some inclusive dialogue through creative placemaking, so thank you. Now we're going to move on into the panel portion of our day, which is really exciting. I'm going to allow our three panelists to introduce themselves through PowerPoint presentations and a surprise, respectively. So let's get started. So the format of the panel is that I'm the panel moderator. Oh, sorry. The format of the panel is that I'm the panel moderator, so I will ask some questions that we crowdsourced and determined that fit really well with this topic. And then if we have time, we can take some questions from the audience. So we'll be the judge, and Joanna will be my timekeeper so that we have time to move into our final wrap-up for the day, our creative activity. So with no further ado, I am pleased to introduce Anne Bray, and she's from Free Waves.
I do many things. I'm an artist, and I teach public art and sort of new genre art out of Claremont and USC. And I run Free Waves, a media arts organization that started in '89. And so what we showed, so I brought a range of what it is, and you can't see it. So let's try the next method. One thing I'm working on right now is out in San Francisco, the Headlands is an art center and residency, and there is tons of fog that rolls in, particularly in August, September, and I am projecting words on the fog. And we're doing things like scared and sacred, and having those two words sort of ask each other on the fog. And it's just like really fun thing to do. See if the Navy and the Coast Guard and everyone else agrees with me or not. Then the other, we could keep going. We can do it. No, that doesn't show me. Okay. So I did a lot of billboards all over the city, and they were, each one of these projects is really a challenge to pull it off, convince the billboard company, the art organization, the funder, how does it relate to the community, and getting all of those elements to work with each other is what I'm proposing. And I really find it like completely satisfying and challenging at the same time. So the one that I really wanted to tell you about is the one that I'm currently doing as the organization. So the Scared and Sacred was me as an artist. The other one is working with Metro buses. All 2,000 LA buses have 2 screens in each of them. And they show these really boring weather, trivia contests, etc. So last year and next year, what I want to do is put artist videos on the bus. Then they're sort of a 2-minute segment. At the end of each one, ask a question of the riders. So, and we just put up a phone number at the end of the question and ask them to text us back. And then we can answer their text, and then they can answer ours. And so we're building a dialogue through the 1 million bus riders a day. And I'm sort of thrilled to try to pull it off. And it's you can ask questions like, we show an animation of something coming out at night, and then we ask what comes out at night in LA. And then anybody can answer it however they feel. So, and the next series of those, we're going to work on presenting health issues, but by artists. Maybe the rest of it. Okay.
Thank you, and thanks for bearing with our technology snafu. If we can make available images to the participants after the dialogue. So we'll talk about that. And then Ryan Janesco, I would love for you to introduce yourself, and hopefully we don't have as much issues with that side. We'll see.
It's okay. My name is Ryan Janesco. I'm an architectural designer and industrial designer living and practicing in Silver Lake. What I wanted to speak to everyone about today is sort of my experiences with technology and crafts in the realm of public art. For the past, it's the longest job I've ever held. I worked for a gallery in Silver Lake called Materials and Applications. If you guys are aware of it, it's the sort of place that's across the street from the mill and Lawson Fenning that always has kind of gargantuan, crazy installations outside. And so I figured I'd talk about that because my sort of like history as an architect through school and just in general, my experiences sort of led me astray from architecture. I kind of went a different route completely, and it all started with a project I'm going to show first, which was, go to this, if you guys can see it, it's right door. Can we go to this one? Go to the left. Yeah, okay, so this is not architecture, but it's sort of architecture. It's a project that I did for an international competition on providing a housing solution to problems of globalization. So essentially what they were looking for was providing a habitable solution to urban problems of transiency and opening up derelict spaces and embedding them with people and meaning and life. And so what we did was we designed this solution, which was this basically this wall of telescoping tubes that you could push and pull. Theoretically, it's all sort of like a conceptual project. And that would create your space for you. It would sort of like morph to your body. It would be sort of like one of those pin things where you put your hand on it and it becomes sort of you. So the idea here was that you could sort of like make your own space, literally carve it out and live in the niches. And at the same time, this would be able to provide infrastructure and would adapt to its surroundings. So it was a way of sort of looking at spaces in cities that were totally unused, whether they're parking spaces or just small niches in between buildings, and sort of embedding this technology system in the middle of them and sort of allowing it to liven up the space. So that was sort of what got me off the tick of building design and architecture and into this sort of world of exhibitions and or sort of conceptual art-based architecture. So having sort of directed that as my trajectory is what I was actually interested in. I came out here and started working for architectural firms and then for M&A. And so, let me skip through to the next one. This is, if anybody went to 2007's Glow Festival in Santa Monica, there was a big dunnage ball there, which was basically an inflatable structure that I had worked on. That was one of the projects. That's that project. I'm going to skip over that though and go straight forward into, you can say, yeah, let's go with that. Go straight to an M&A project, which is was part of the Fallen Fruit series at EAL 2 years ago. Essentially, to give you guys a background on the project, Fallen Fruit proposed, and they're a sort of cultural entity that does commentary on publicly available fruit. They proposed an exhibition at LACMA, which was based on the idea of edible art. And so they came to a series of artists, M&A, Didier Hess, Lauren Bond, National Petermelon Council, to produce these sort of what they call farm dens, which are these gardens of farming, to produce this sort of like edible architecture and art. And so they originally put the idea out. There was a group in San Francisco called the National Petermelon Council. I don't know if you're aware of those guys. And they proposed this idea that there would be this farm that would grow a hybrid form of melon by allowing the promiscuous nature of bitter melons and sweet melons to come together and produce a bitter sweet melon, a new variety, which was also sort of a commentary on sort of psychology as well. So they proposed the idea, and then they came to us because we were right there and we had all this expertise with doing installations like this. And in my history, I'd done a lot of work with bamboo, so it just sort of it found its natural progression over to me. So what we did was we proposed this, go to the next slide. We proposed this trellis. You can see it's done, the images on the left are from a 3D modeling program. So we basically measured out the site, we picked out a site that was right by the Japanese pavilion, and made this, designed this trellis that was 2 tunnels that came into one, so that we grew melons from either side and they came into one, and then they hybridized over the top. We can go to the next slide. And the way that we built it, which I think touches upon this notion of creative placemaking and inclusive design, it was all based, and we only had 3 weekends to do it, which, looking back and even going through it at the time, it was kind of like an insane schedule, but it worked, and it felt great at the end. So this first slide is us harvesting bamboo from site. Bamboo was going to be taken down anyway because LACMA was going to be building a cafe right by where the resident pavilion is. So we were like, oh, that's great. We just take all the bamboo. There's no carbon footprints. It's readily available. Let's just harvest it. So over the course of 2 days, we harvested with about 30 volunteers over 250 poles of bamboo, and then just trucked them around building and started building with them. Next slide. And so the way that we devised, and this is a technique that I had gotten from somebody who built bamboo bicycles. The way that we were able to sort of fabricate the major structure, the arches of it, is you just do it with a blowtorch. And if you just sort of hold on to the bottom end of it, hit it with a blowtorch and bend it, it takes a curve and it stays there. The sugars react with the heat, and it basically like caramelizes itself into a rigid form, but it's super malleable in between. It's like a Twizzler. So we bent it, then we lashed it. Next slide, please. And then we hung it. And that is just, it looks very, very light, and this is literally, I'm underneath, and it's completely bewildered by the whole thing. We finished it up, and Jenna, who's up in the top right-hand corner, just starts climbing up the thing, and I'm like freaking out. This is like, I just put in all this work, and now the thing is gonna break. And we got 12 people on it. And it was awesome. And so after we got the structure built, then next slide please, we started planting it. The woman on the right is Laura Hall. I know she's got a website. I wish I could remember what it is. She had written for, she works with Eric Knudsen every so often, who's a big farming eco person in Echo Park. But she helped us sort of develop the planting system and curate the plants, figure the whole thing out, how to make the plants really work. Because one of the problems that we sort of like found ourselves in is that the Lackawanna wanted it to be as dense as possible, and the artist wanted it to be as dense as possible. But the reality is, the denser you make planting, the more apt it is to grow fungus and kill itself. So we had this sort of like real back and forth about how to actually make this thing work. Because that's us planting it, and then next slide. That's the sort of fruits of our labor, the bitter melons and the sweet melons. And Matthias Feininger, a fallen fruit, always loved to sort of describe this as the penis and breasts of our labor. And so, go to the next slide. And so that's the sort of final object. It's this completely volunteer built, really nice, intricate, woven, thin shell bamboo structure that had all this wonderful fruit of it. So we harvested it, and the seeds that came out of this harvest are bittersweet, they're a new hybrid, and that's that. I think I'm going to try and can I do one more project only because it speaks about a more urban environment. We go, not the next one, let's keep going. Okay, so the next project we're going to talk about is less about the volunteer labor force and more about where it's applied to. This is another project with the M&A crew. This time it's Didier Hess. M&A is the nonprofit, Didier Hess is their for-profit public art design. And so this project was a project that was rented, or they won through Department of Cultural Affairs for doing 1% art on the new fire station in Crenshaw. And the idea behind the project was that they would sort of deploy this lighting system that responded to humidity levels. So it essentially was an animated lighting sculpture that responded to what the firemen looked like, basically looking at, which was, it's humid out, we're less likely to have a fire, so the animation is sort of low key. If it's very dry out, the animation sort of picks up, and it's averaging this data from a humidity sensor above the roof. So the project itself is not on a museum grounds. It's in the middle of Crenshaw. It's in a kind of rough area, a beautiful area, but a rough area, especially relative to city grounds of Latin. And we built this thing entirely in-house. And part of the reason we did it was just because no one else could do it. And the other reason was that you get to have so much more creative and artistic input. So next slide, please. This is just a couple of images of the original origami pieces and us doing prototyping. Next slide. This is a rendering of what it was supposed to look like on the building, which was a little bit more high res. The end product actually looks a lot like this. So it was this thing that looked like sort of it was just growing all over the building. Next slide, please. And then this is where we start to begin fabricating. The sort of panel that you can maybe see, well, the big green thing and the lots of green things on the right are water jet cut. They're visually designed and manufactured flat origami pieces. And the sort of machine that's up at the top, we want to produce a patina so that they aged in a natural way and also have this sort of more organic quality to them. And we built it out of a blender. We took apart the blender, used the motor, and then just sprayed the patina as the thing was going like this. And as long as you didn't get your shin next to it, it was awesome. If you got your shin next to it, had no shin. So the thing went around at like 1,000 RPM or something. Okay, so that's us making the pieces. Next slide, please. And this is us bending. And so it was a pretty simple maneuver, but it was all done in-house. Next slide, please. And so once we bent everything, we assembled all the components, put them together, made them actual lights. And next slide, please. This is just a quick set of photos about the sort of team that went into this. There's an architect, an interior designer, and a musician that were basically the heart and soul of this whole thing. And the musician, unbeknownst to me, was also super into electronics. So the whole lighting part of it was, with 2 days' notice, he was super into it. It was really, really helpful. So the diversity of that team was really sort of what made it happen. And again, this is just us prototyping, doing a one-to-one mock-up of what the building's actually going to be, building out a plywood in the front yard, and building it. Next slide, please. And then this is us installing it on top of the fire station wall. And we did, in fact, install the whole thing with lab coats on it. Why? Because it looks kind of weird. And next slide, please. And that's the final installation. So it looks pretty close to what the original rendering was. And next slide, please. And it glows around it, and it looks alive. And
So
it's
it's Crenshaw and what's the cross street?
Martin Luther King. So there's that neighborhood that's in there that's like kind of an amazing place. It's very quiet and very into itself, but it was Martin Luther King and Coliseum and Cross Streets. And that strip along Martin Luther King is a pretty rough area. Definitely more gritty, to use a term, than the other locations that we'd ever built at. But the impact, I think, for both us and the community was much stronger because it was sort of us highlighting something that was beautiful to us and that had opportunity. And what we just wanted to do was not sort of put a big stamp on it, just to say, hey, this is here. Come on over and take a look. That's that.
Hey, I had a video to show, but then on the drive over, I decided I would introduce myself in a different way. I'm here to talk about my work with an organization called Great Leap and a mentorship program that I run called the Collaboratory. Instead, well, I will talk about that. But so I'm going to simulate the beginning of this full-length show. It's called It's Great to Be American. I will need your assistance because it's this big multimedia extravaganza. And I'll just do a little section of it and then I'll just stop. So, okay, who knows the John? Who knows the Washington Post March? I need people to sing this. Dun da 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 welcome to my country! Hi, welcome to America! Good to see you! Hi, I'm so glad you're here. Hi, keep going! America. Well, here we are. It's late October 2012. You know what that means? No, it's not the World Series. It's time to exercise the essence of our democratic process. Time to choose the next president of our country. And that's just one of the many things that's great about being an American. You know, how about those debates, huh? We had debate number 1. Debate number 2. Oh. And day after tomorrow, debate number 3. Who knows? You know, I don't know about you, but I found the debates, well, the main thing they left me with was, that's not true. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. You're wrong. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, I did. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. You know, that was so helpful for illuminating the key issues and significant differences between the two candidates. One characteristic of this particular election is that the number of undecided voters is exceptionally small, which is not really a surprise given that these two candidates are such polar opposites on very fundamental matters. You know, for example, one of them is rich and the other is super rich. Just kidding. Not really. But really, has there ever been a time when the country has been so polarized, so divided? Okay, we had a civil war. That was a little more extreme, but the gap, the chasm, the Grand Canyon between us in this country, it's so vast. It's like, it could be discouraging. No, really, it could be discouraging. So, I have one answer for this. let's play a game. Let's play a game. It's a creative placemaking game. Okay, I'm going to ask you something, and you get to answer with a complete and utter lie. All right? You try and fool the people around you. Try and fool your friends who know you. Okay? The most outrageous, convincing lie you can come up with, or you may answer utterly truthful, and I won't know the difference. Okay, you ready? All right. Raise your hand, let me hear you say, yeah! If you're voting for Mitt Romney. Yeah! What's going on? Okay, raise your hand, let me hear you say, yeah! If you're voting for Barack Obama. Yeah! Who's telling the truth and who's lying here? This is a form of creative placemaking we have just made room for everyone. Well, whoever you're voting for, you're all welcome. Now, I know I sounded a little cynical about the debates, but actually there actually is something I find genuinely interesting about these debates. And it's a particular thing about it. See the candidates travel around the country doing these like town hall meeting things and hearing from all these different communities. Because I've been doing some traveling of my own. And not only here in the US, but beyond. Not to get elected or anything, but just to ask people a couple simple questions. See, I've been conducting my own little personal survey, trying to feel the pulse of the nation, trying to get a sense of America's place in the global consciousness. It's so enlightening. You know, you'd be amazed at what people. Okay. Why don't I ask you here? What do you say, huh? A little more audience participation? Are you game? Yeah? Yeah? Okay! All right. Now you gotta imagine I have a big whiteboard here with a marker. Question number 1, question number 2. 2 simple questions. Question number 1. What, in your opinion, is the best thing about the United States? What do you love about this country? Now, you can just shout it out, or if you're Asian, raise your hand and wait patiently until most of the white people have had their say, then they go, call on you. What do you love about this country? National pride. Parks, yes.
Libraries.
Commerce, what? Freedom, yes.
Macaroni and cheese.
Macaroni and cheese, yes.
Opportunity.
Opportunity, yes.
Free speech.
Diversity.
Yes, okay.
Possibility.
The arts.
Respect for waiting in line.
All right. Great. Oh, before I forget, I don't want to go on too long, so I'm going to just set my timer so I don't forget. Okay. All right. Question number 2, and perhaps you guessed it. What, in your opinion, is the worst thing about the United States? What do you hate? What do you hate?
LAX.
What do you hate? What really needs to change in this country, big time?
Bureaucracy. Litigation.
Healthcare.
Politics.
Oh.
Two parties.
Equality.
Income gap.
All right. Okay, wow, look at that, huh? Your imagination? Quite a range of responses, you know. I mean, who knew the choir I'm preaching to would be so amazing? Well, let's take a look at what we've got here, shall we? First, we'll start with what do we love about America? What did I hear? Diversity, quality of life issue. What else was there? Freedom of speech, yes, another individual rights issue. What else did we hear? Things that we love.
Respect for waiting in line.
Respect for waiting in line, that has to do with another quality of life. Well, in my humble analysis, most of the things that we love and cherish about the United States have their conceptual roots in things like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, especially the Bill of Rights. Now these are amazing, beautiful creations. An operator's manual for how we as a nation should conduct ourselves based on fairness, equality, integrity. The Constitution wasn't perfect. I mean, after all, it was drafted by a bunch of straight white guys and had to have a few blind spots. Once America wrapped its collective brain around things that were wrong or unjust, we amended it. The 13th Amendment, no more slavery, thank you. Took a civil war, but we changed it. The 15th and 19th Amendment, voting privileges extended to all citizens regardless of race or sex, another crucial correction. But of course, oppression does not fade quietly into the night. No, it goes kicking and screaming into the soiled pages of history, there to remain lurking. Proposition 8, for example, eliminating the right for a certain group of people to marry. A lovely piece of legislation which made bigotry into state law. Well, mark my words. Someday, and not a moment too soon, this blatant discrimination will be another historical relic with its own rotten page in the book. Because on these pages, of these documents, there's such an aspiring for things to be right. All men are created equal. They meant women too, they just didn't know it at the time. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure tranquility, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty. Man, that rocks. Now, most of these ideas have fallen into the general category of we the people shall not be fucked with by the powers that be, also known as the government. Of course, we've always had a little trouble with just what constitutes we the people. And this is where the founding daddies was a little confused. See, they thought we the people meant the rich, straight white guys who owned everything. And apparently we're still not quite over that confusion. Which brings us to our second question. What do you... Oh, sorry. All out of time. Guess we'll have to get to that later on. Thank you.
So I just wanted to get started, and we can pass the microphone around with our questions about the day. And these were, like I mentioned earlier, kind of thought of by our programming committee to bring us all together. And then if we have time, we'll conclude the panel at 3, and Joanna's going to be my timekeeper, so maybe we'll be able to move into some group questions. So with no further... What's happening? Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. All right, so the first one was about introducing yourself. Does everyone feel introduced? Okay. For this event, we endeavor to explore how creative placemaking can enjoin atypical collaborators in a dialogue not only about art, but also about our community at large. What does creative placemaking mean to you? Anyone who wants to start, I can pass this.
I think, well, I was thinking about it from a media perspective, which I was thinking was sort of interesting, is to think more architectural, physical, right, performing arts and media arts. And it's really, to me, unusual to think of placemaking from all of those different perspectives. And that, so I want to put in the media public art aspect of it, and thinking of the work, what we're given. And one is each of us are sort of subjected to about 5,000 ads per day. And a lot of them are telling you what to do. You know, buy this, etc. They're all, a lot of it is in that command, imperative voice. And I really feel like what the mass media is doing is really telling you what to think and convincing you actually what to do. So a lot of what's swirling in our heads in public space is actually corporate media, right? Of you should be thin, you should be eating this, you should be rich, you, etc., on and on. And we have 5,000 of those messages per day. So how is that permeated each of us? And then what do the arts do? To me, the arts do the exact opposite. It's really questions, you know, an either or, like in your, you know, the good and the bad, the comparison, the archetype versus the stereotype, the opening it up, the trying to go to a new place that you've never considered instead of hammering in, you know, you must be thin. So what I really interested in placemaking is going around the city looking for available resources, you know, and systems that I think I can get the arts into.
I work with an organization called Great Leap. And Great Leap is a multicultural performing arts organization based in LA, founded by Nobuko Miyamoto. And it was originally an Asian American performing arts organization. Now it's more multicultural. And I guess one of the core values of Great Leap is that we think everybody has a story to tell. And we're very interested in creating an environment, a methodology, organizational structures where people get to tell their stories, and you know, using the performing arts as the vehicle for people to communicate and express their stories is the main way that we work. We not only, well, okay, the program I direct is called the Collaboratory. And it's a 8 to 10 week mentorship program for emerging artists. And we bring in people who are interested in our themes. We have various themes. We've done communities of color. We've done immigration and democracy. We've done interfaith coalition building. Most recently, we've been doing work on caring for the environment. And so the place that we make is, and we have different kinds of guidelines and values and principles for creating a place where everybody's voice is heard, and where everybody's, you know, opinions, however diverse, are treated with respect. Where we try to, we're very process oriented. We definitely have a product that we create, which is a performance, but at least 60% of our focus is on the process. How do we work together, and how do we make this kind of a safe space for people to share who they are with each other?
For me, creative placemaking is kind of a weird term, because at least in my experience with sort of injecting art into public spaces and public places, it's not so much creative placemaking as it is creative place highlighting. It's just about sort of bringing the unforeseen back to the surface and saying, you know, think twice about this. Don't just sort of like run over the top of it. And so for me, it's just about sort of deploying some sort of system or ephemera that just highlights an underutilized space and says, you know, think about using it in a different way, or just rethink your initial sort of opinion about it. And whatever form that takes, that's just sort of conceptually where my head goes when that question is posed. So.
Thank you all. So the title of today's conversation, which is Sparking Inclusive Dialogue Through Creative Placemaking, assumes that creative placemaking can spark inclusive dialogue in communities. So can this type of dialogue transform neighborhoods, and how does this happen?
With difficulty, right? So to me, one of the one that I've grown up with is that people are alienated by the arts. In the Americans in particular will say, like if I present something in public, I don't tell people that it is art. I say that it's something to look at, and they will, like magnets, go straight to it. If I turn around to the same crowd and I say, oh, it's art, they actually turn on their heels and head away. And so I just stay away from that particular word, but I use everything else. A visual experiment, other terms, anything that's open that they don't have a pre-thought about it. And then the other is that I've just surveyed not all, but many of the bus riders. And so this is the lowest income in Los Angeles that's gathered in, that I surveyed. And their comments about the arts, about the particular videos, was like amazing. So one was just, we started the question very simple: do you recognize where it is? Then what do you think the video was about? Then would you answer that question that we had posed at the end of the video? And then what would your video be about? And every person that we talked to, which was 540, all like instantly had what their video would be about. And they were profound. They were like really about them in relation to people. They were caring about what's happening in LA. The answers were just like stunning. And I really feel like what we're asking for is very difficult. Because there is such diversity in Los Angeles. So I ask those questions, and the range of answers that come back is very, very scattered. At the same time, we have all these different languages, a lot of different history, but I think people really are willing to go, and it's like whether you have the energy to put in that communal gathering.
This is a kind of a difficult one for me to answer. It's sort of like asking to measure impact, which is, if you give government money, they want a measurement of the impact, right? They want numbers and stuff, and some of these things are very hard to quantify. So in terms of transforming a neighborhood, I don't know that I can really say one way or the other. Most of the projects that we have done have not been geographically based. There'd be a constituency, but the only project we did that was really about a neighborhood was back in '03. We did something on Boyle Heights. The first really multicultural neighborhood in LA, a really interesting part of town with a really interesting history. And we worked with just regular, community members who wanted to be part of our performance workshop, and these weren't performers, they weren't artists, they were just people who, boy, you never met so many people who love their neighborhood as people who are from Boyle Heights. They are like, it was amazing, yeah. All people we would meet would just go on and on about how much they loved Boyle Heights. And it's really an interesting place. You should check it out. we did this project in conjunction with the Japanese American National Museum, which had a concurrent exhibit on Boyle Heights. So we did this workshop with community members, and we performed it in the museum, in the exhibition. And people turned out for that. It was really amazing. It was one of the most successful things we've ever done. Transforming the neighborhood, I don't know. But I would say it is a significant thing for people to see their experience and their community reflected in what's on stage. It has an impact on, it's a validation of the significance of your experience, your community's experience. And I think that does do something, you know. But I couldn't say it transformed the neighborhood. I think it just transforms consciousness one person at a time.
Just speaking from, I guess, my own experience with M&A and working for a period of time in the same location, I mean, I think that question sort of has to have a time duration and a sort of like repetition element to it. I mean, inclusive design dialogue can have an impact on the neighborhood as long as the dialogue is left open, as long as you continue to speak to one another. If you sort of just make a statement, it's like putting up a billboard. It's this thing that was there and could come down, but it's just one thing. Whereas if you continue to sort of repeat the same idea but maybe with different textures, you continually bring energy to the neighborhood. And you know, just like I said, from speaking from my experience, not that I knew I wasn't even here when M&A started. I was back in New York. It was high school at that point. Because they started around 2001, I think. Silver Lake, from what I know, is obviously a much different neighborhood. And it's been around for 10 plus years at this point. And not that singular location can take all the credit for the neighborhood coming back together. But the fact that it's sort of like baseline measure where it's sort of like, it's the way it works and the way it functions is to bring people together to build things. And a lot of times the sort of value to that is that we're going to build things that we don't really know how to build them. So the more people you have there, the more likely you are to get the questions answered and the problem solved. But by doing it over and over and over again and including more and more and more people, I think it does have the opportunity to transform your neighborhood. It sort of establishes a connection between people, whether they are conscious of it or not. It strengthens the community for sure.
Can you describe an instance, and this is sort of addressing the previous question, so I wonder if you'll have different answers or if we should skip it. Can you describe an instance in which you have experienced the effects of art or cultural events having a positive impact on a region's cultural or economic health as a whole?
I got it.
Okay.
Go.
You wanna go?
You might have the same.
All right. I don't. We are having a whole lecture series this whole fall that you're invited to the whole rest of it, and some others that are already online. And so if you go to freewaves, waves.org, there's a big sign in the middle of the webpage. It's called SoCal Social and Art Plus People. And we are having conversations all over the city this fall, really about this, about socially engaged art. And there is a different question posed for every event. And there at many locations and different, often weekday nights and some weekends. And one of them is actually at Self-Help Graphics on some day in November. And it's really sort of, because Boyle Heights has come up as a few times now. And I really think the Self-Help Graphics was deeper into East LA. They moved a couple years ago to First Street. That has been declared an arts district starting now. And one of the comments is that it's always been an arts district, right? The passion that people feel for the and that as you declare something an arts district, are you starting to gentrify it? You know, the subway already came in. Now you call it this fancy name. Now what are you going to do next? And what about the people that have lived there forever? So this thing of, you know, what do the arts have to do with gentrification? I think is, you know, deep and, you know, problematic. And that what are we doing for people in a very long-term way, not just like make it sort of ritzy, you know, Silver Lakey, you know, next year.
For me, this question sparked a very specific answer, which was, you know, even though I've been a part of public arts scene and done a lot in the public art spectrum for a while, the most impactful sort of moments, and I don't even think it was, I guess the artist intended this to be part of the public art, was when The Rock came through Los Angeles. It was great, like entire neighborhoods were up, people were out in like their pajamas, everyone was talking because they're like, what is, you know, where is it, where's it going, it looks like a giant dinosaur egg, what is all this? And it was like one of those moments where just everyone was coming together, and it felt like everyone was on the same plane. You felt like you were partially on another planet, and like, oh, now I get what like the Mars rover feels like when it rolls over things and sees giant rocks. But for me, that one instance was like was kind of amazing.
As we have seen through the articles we have been sharing leading up to this event on Facebook, diversity is valued in creative placemaking, as we've been defining it for this event. How do you define diversity, and what is the value of diversity in your artistic process?
Do you want to start?
How do I define diversity? Well, you know, society slices a human being up into all these different possible categories. And what are the three big ones? Race, gender, class. Just trying to find diversity on those three categories is a challenge sometimes. But, you know, who do you include in your project, in your process? Obviously, the more diversity you have, the more interesting the mix is and the more representative it becomes. We always think of the collaboratories, it's a kind of a tiny microcosm of society. That's what we're aiming for. And we often fail in our attempts for great diversity. We can't find enough guys. We've been doing the collaboratory since 2005, and it's been overwhelmingly female dominated. And but in terms of other pieces of identity, race, class, age, religious background, you know, it's a very important part of our process. And what's interesting is when the collaboratory first started out, it was specifically defined as a mentorship program for emerging artists of color. And I had this big conversation with Nobuko Miyamoto, the artistic director. I was like, well, should we include white folks in this project? And it was like, well, that's fine, it's going to change. And how do you keep this balance of based on what we were aiming for, which was the unheard stories, the marginalized experience, etc. And so since then we've kind of thrown that out the window. It's no longer just for people of color. It's, you know, our designator is emerging artist and people who are interested in collaborative work, working together. Long-winded answer, it's very important.
It's funny, I have two kind of like polar reactions to this, and one comes from the sort of like ever student in me, and the other one comes from the architect and fabricator and person in me, which is that as a student, yeah, diversity is the most amazing thing because it just brings things to the table that you just didn't expect to be there, and you learn so much from it. And there's definitely projects that I've worked on where, you know, the diversity has, without me guiding it at all, has, I mean, the bamboo trellis is a good example of that, has sort of just like taken on and just moved. I mean, it was a real fear when I started building, when we started the lashing process, that like people wouldn't pick up on it. And then a couple of artists from Japan, this guy Sasaki, who does these kind of amazing drawings, he and his friends just, it was like watching like an ant colony where it just went, and just the whole thing just like built itself. And yeah, I mean, they're older, they're like serious artists, but they sort of enabled the rest of the team to sort of go, oh, I can do that. And it was, I just had to sort of like stand back and just kind of point sort of gesturally to like, over there. But that was all that was really necessary. On the other side of that, there's been projects where the diversity, if the preparation isn't there, diversity can sometimes lead a crowd to sort of go, well, now what do we do? And you know, if you don't establish the structure, it's difficult to get things going and going productively. So there's definitely, always include diversity, just be prepared so that everyone can get the most out of it. And amazing projects come about from that.
And the part I wanted to add was just maybe my image of diversity nowadays is people that don't agree with you. And that the extra time that involves.
Still or visual art can exist in a moment in time, or in the case of music, film, media installations, dance, theater, and anything I haven't named, can exist over a longer period of time that is still finite. Does your art or does creative placemaking challenge this notion that the observation of or experience of art has a time limit?
Having worked in video for most of my life, it's been a challenge at every single project. And one I want to call out is at LAX Airport right now. There's a brand new media arts permanent piece at the international arrival of Tom Bradley Terminal. And there is 29 monitors over here, and the back of it are 29 more, and down there are 25. And there's 17 different artists made pieces, and it's going to be up permanently there. And it's all these people are arriving to the United States. This is the first thing they see. And after the cops and inspectors and everybody else. So I feel like excited to have that introduce the United States to these people. Using time-based art in public space, to me, has advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage, to me, a moving image, just like live, by you performing your piece here today, I feel like that is very compelling. And having live and moving and changing grabs people's attention versus, you know, still, verbal, all of these other things, they just take your mind to think about them. But the noise and the light and the change of video and performing arts, they grab your eye and, you know, attract it. You sort of can't not look at it. Just how your eye is programmed, right? At the intersection of the brightest and the darkest thing is what you will look at. And if it is moving, your eye will follow it, right? So for getting attention, it's great. The people are busy and they are moving on, so complicated.
Short answer, no. Trying to answer the question. But one of the interesting things that we've been dealing with at Great Leap is, live performance, it happens and it's gone. Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't come to your show. When are you going to do it again? You missed it. It's gone. And if you're in the performing arts, you kind of have to live with that fact that it's ephemeral, it's fleeting. But now one of the things Great Leap is doing is we're making these environmentally themed music videos and we put them up on YouTube. Like, oh, there's a place where it lives now. And it's still finite, but access to what you've created is more available, 24 hours a day now. And so that's kind of a tangential response to this question.
I don't know if I have a conclusive answer to that. But it does bring up, or bring to mind an artist who I think lives through that medium, which is a guy by the name of Andy Goldsworthy. He's a Scottish artist that does these amazing sort of pieces. They're temporary sculptures, and the video, the one that really was most outstanding to me in a video I saw of him was that he was building these, basically like these pine cones right by the ocean at a place where the tide was rising. So these pine cones were just stacked rocks. And the tide rose slowly enough where it wouldn't knock it over. But as the tide came in, it disappeared, and as the tide went out, the sculpture sort of like disintegrated. And it had this kind of really amazing sort of relationship to time. And so whatever that's worth, that's what comes out of my head.
Thank you, and I think that I'm not a panelist, but I'll say something. The idea is also that dialogue, the experience of art, might transcend the actual viewing of art. If it's on the YouTube, maybe I'm talking about it with somebody. So that's also a kind of thought about that. What are the challenges when using a collaborative approach to making art? And we talked a little bit about this with Brian's answer about diversity. And what have you learned from those experiences? And so I know collaboratory will have an answer, but if you need to tweak the question for your answer, that's fine.
On my private work, I do collaborate, and then with Free Waves, it's all of the projects are collaborative. And I'd say, for me, what it is that the whole idea of collective knowledge. So for what a whole group of people, like your diversity answer, that somebody just has some other skills that you never even thought of, right? That anyone would know how to do that. And then the ones that you've sort of thought of, which is, just these questions are a collaboration of you really wanting a certain thing from us. But each of us, three, are really having very different things to offer to this. And in a way, what I really recommend to you is, what are you good at? What do you bring to a team? And being sort of, I'm really good at this, I'm medium good at that, and then there are other skills, and sort of counting on who else, what do you need when you're putting together a team. And even going through your head, don't choose people right away, but say, okay, I'm good at writing the press release, thinking of the title, and finding the initial groups. Well, okay, then what is missing from that sequence? And imagine if you had a community organizer as your partner. Oh, that'd be good, but what if I had a performing artist, to go with me? What if I had a lawyer? Like, in a way, every single position you could imagine would completely change the project. And I think it's a really great mental exercise to put yourself through both the private question and then, like, who complements you.
I always, whenever we start another round of the collaboratory, I always tell them, collaboration is the art of disagreement. And when we agree, it's easy, it's a piece of cake, but you know, this is art making and there's no right answers. A lot of times it boils down to what you like and what I like. And the way that we work in the collaboratory, it gets intensely personal. And it does require a willingness, and so you do have to choose well who you collaborate with, a willingness to really question yourself. Like Anne said, the wonderful thing about collaborating is that those other people will think of things you never would have thought of, and make it that much richer. But the more brains you get involved with, the more impossible it becomes to get anybody to agree on anything. And there's different kind of styles of collaborating. And again, referring to what Anne said, there's sort of collaborating by CV. So you get your choreographer, you get your costume designer, you get your sound designer, and this is our collaborative team. Everybody's a specialist. We do, okay, there's another form of collaboration, which is the hardest one, which is everybody has a say about everything, right? Everybody has a say about everything. Oh my God, it's impossible. But it's very exciting and it's very interesting. So makes it way harder. It's way harder to collaborate. It's so much easier to have a hierarchical structure. You know, hierarchy has kind of this automatic negative connotation, but hierarchy it's just a system of organization. You know, it lends itself easily to oppression. It does, but hierarchy itself is just a system. It says, okay, you're responsible for that, and you're responsible for that, and you're responsible for that. So there are all these variations between hierarchical approach and collaborative approach that I've found that you can experiment with if you agree. So we do that a lot. We said, I say, okay, if you want, everybody can have a say about everything. You can all argue about the choreography, you can all argue about the writing, you can all argue about the directing, and all sit back and watch. Then different questions come up. How do you handle disagreement? Is it the most forceful person who always gets their way? Who does all the talking? Who does the listening? When do you get caught in needing to win? Needing to have your way. When can you let go and say, okay, we'll do it your way? So and that gets really personal. It gets really personal, but it's very, very interesting, and really opens your mind to consciousness and self-awareness. So those are kind of the reasons and the values that we try to teach through our collaboratory mentorship program. And yeah, I think the biggest thing I personally learned from working collaboratively is I don't always have to have my way. I want my way. Believe I want it my way. But that there's this funny place where we often feel either threatened or impatient when it's not going our way in a collaborative process. And to learn to let go of that is incredibly liberating.
You guys said it.
Here's my final canned question, and then we will have time for audience questions. These are perfect, though. We have many arts administrators, as well as different kinds of creative types, such as teachers, and I'm sure I have not named a lot of who is in the room, artists, arts administrators, and more and more. What is your recommendation as to how everyone present, and I know we don't know everyone, so let's go with the question, can support creative placemaking in his or her community? And let's tweak the question if we need to.
What I was thinking about in relation to this question was really looking for resources, is how I go about the city, of where in, what assets can I see and get a hold of? That every project that we've been talking about, it's like the budget's always limited, right? If the arts are involved, there's never enough money for what you want to do, like I've ever seen. So, to me, what I always do is what can I find in this neighborhood to take advantage of, and therefore that whole line item is out. And so therefore, what else we could place in there. And usually it is for human labor is what I spend our money on. And so I've in a way, like training yourselves to look for resources in community. And with one thought I've had is with the amount of recycling going on, like whether that's one of the items that you can find. What may I pick it up again?
Okay.
Why don't you?
While Anne was speaking, I was sort of putting together my answer and also sort of a diagram for what her answer was to a degree. And so here's my sort of like military general response to it, which is like, mine your data, define your parameters, identify opportunities, and then just capitalize. And if you can sort of like go about problem solving that way, it sort of like takes the, I know Dan, you've been speaking about sort of like the personality there, the how personal this can get. As having the sort of unique relationship to some of the projects I've had, it took me a while to learn it, but if I could sort of absolve myself of the personal aspect of it, and it was much easier just being, in some cases, the guy who fabricated the whole thing. If I could remove that personal aspect of it and just treat each problem or discussion point as a series, as a chunk of data, you can just look at it, figure out the best way to respond, and then go forward. And then, that's, like I said, a very sort of militaristic approach to it, but it for certain projects, it makes the project sort of evolve quickly enough where it feels worthwhile. So yeah.
The architect made a diagram.
Yeah, basically.
Well, one I was picturing was just that this morning I went to a market makeover in East LA, and how they had taken Public Matters is the group. They work in Torres brand new high school in East LA, and they're working for the whole year or 2 or 3 with this neighborhood, and they're taking the corner markets and they're redesigning the exterior so they're really bright, colorful, beautiful things. Their fruit and vegetables are right towards the front of the store. They do have fruit and vegetables. The candy and the soda, etc., has been moved deeper into the store. They're teaching the parents about nutrition. The kids are learning cooking in school. So it's sort of this whole nutritional program, all the way from food to the media, to the social media, to the color design, to the text that supports it, and it's all the resource that at the base of it is the corner market. So I feel like it's these resources sort of are in many places and ones that we didn't really expect.
I guess it partly depends on how you define your community, but I was trying to think what's the most basic thing I recommend. For me, it has something to do with like learning the art of listening. That and this is I come from this kind of personal storytelling place, which is this really intimate personal stuff, but that when people feel like they have been heard, you're more likely to be able to develop a relationship with them. And that happens on an individual level, and it does happen on a collective level. That when people feel they have been heard, and heard with respect, you can move mountains. So, looking for opportunities. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Arya.
Arya did this really cool thing at the lunch table. We all sat there with these strangers, and she said, "Oh, let's do something really geeky. Let's do what did you call it? A round table, and have everybody introduce themselves." Right? And I just thought, oh, that was so smart. You know, she, in that moment, she took that moment, and she made sure everybody was heard at the table. Real simple, but that changes the whole dynamic when people have been heard. And so, that's what comes to my mind in terms of a recommendation.
Do I have your permission to go till 3 instead of 2:50? Or are you guys running away? Okay. All right. So we can open up to a few questions from the crowd, and Joanna will tell us when it's 3 and we will abruptly end. She'll probably tell us at 2:57. Can I just get a hand in the audience? All right, Stephanie, yell for us.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. I'd like to return briefly to the question of cultural diversity. I'm wondering if any of you have any experience bringing different ethnic constituencies together in a dialogue in a more structured way, 2 or more. And if so, I'd love to hear about it. If not, if you were asked to do something like that, how would you go about it?
Multiple experiences of doing this, and I think 2 come to mind. One was right after the LA riots, of really noticing how the press had treated that 92 event, and there were a lot of reporters in the street that couldn't speak the languages of the people they were trying to interview, and other people were using the fuck word so much that they couldn't be quoted in any press. So Free was already about 3 years old at that point, and we knew video makers all over the city, and they were all out videotaping and editing and quickly, and we grabbed a lot of videos immediately afterwards and just put them side by side and put them into a 1-hour program. We showed it all over the whole city on cable and screenings, and it was, to me, what was so amazing was how different each slice, like everybody was seeing this event from a very different point of view, and by the putting them side by side in video was like listening in person that Dan was talking about, and that nobody's right is difficult position to make people believe they're in. But this side-by-sideness and sort of equal respect to each of the positions is something that I feel like you have to structure into whatever you're doing, and to get people to believe it because their experience is the opposite of that, is one thing that I would propose. Then I helped produce a Suzanne Lacey piece where we were all women that participated in it, but there was a full range ethnically, and we wanted to just sort of do an experiment among us that could our femaleness be strong enough to overcome our ethnic difference. And how we met was, first we met as just mono groups, and then two different races meeting, then 3, and then 4, and everybody. And it sort of was a very gradual process, but it was first meeting in isolation.
We'll be listening, Brian. Just kidding. For this kind of cross-cultural work, I tend to prefer to be very structured and methodical. I also find it depends on what you're talking about. The more emotionally charged the topic, I think the more structure you need so that it doesn't just disintegrate into a free-for-all. I know there's some people, they kind of like the free-for-all approach. Yeah, let's just throw them together and let them have at it with each other. But that's not my approach. So a little bit similar to what Anne described. I think
Why not the free-for-all?
That's happening already out there. People screaming at each other and saying, "Go fuck your," we got plenty of that. We got plenty of that. So I do like to use a lot of structure. So cross-cultural, cross-gender, whatever it is. For example, I make sure everybody has an equal amount of time to speak. I try to make sure no one speaks twice until everyone has spoken once. Sometimes people bristle at this structure, but it actually does make a difference. And sometimes I will go so far as to make sure that the people who are, now this is a tricky one to define, because it's sort of like measuring oppression. But the more marginalized, the people who are less likely to be heard from, I invite them to speak first. So if I got a group of men and women, I will often ask the women first to speak, etc. So being conscious of all these kind of dynamics when you bring two groups together, if you're talking about ethnicities, sometimes if you have a topic and it is very charged and people are going to have a lot of feelings coming up, you got to have a kind of a way to contain that. You have to have a way to make that safe. And so how do you allow for people to have feelings and nobody freaks out? So there's some people to say what they need to say, they got to cry their way through it. Or they got to shake their way through it. And how do you make sure that is respected and honored, and that it doesn't in any way invalidate what they have to say? So those are kind of things I keep in mind when bringing together groups, and again, it depends on what they're talking about.
You know, in first hearing this question, I didn't. I've worked with diverse groups before. You know, culturally, in terms of their creative input, in terms of what their backgrounds are. And I was gonna say, no, I've never worked in a situation where culturally or ethnically or sexually I've entered into a sort of conversation specifically with those sort of like signposts up. And then I realized that's absolutely not true, because the first project I showed, I opted to work with two friends of mine who I hadn't had a chance to collaborate with. It was two women, one was black, one was Indian. And it was the best collaborative experience I had had in my life up to that point, because there was so much sort of variability, or there was so many new parameters that I wouldn't have necessarily considered in that project that were brought to light. And you know, they sort of filled in the gaps where, it was one of those things where they filled in gaps that I either didn't know existed or just wasn't really looking at. And I think the opposite was true too. And I was helping them. I mean, for the most part, I was sort of like the bull in the china shop, kind of going, I think this I think this is generally the direction we want to go. And one of my teammates would sort of texture the discussion this way, and then the other one, who was really amazing at graphics, would sort of texture the sort of physical response in another way. And we were all, but I mean, we lucked out also because we were very much on the same plane at the, you know, for the project. But it was the kind of thing that, I mean, I think it paid dividends to me. It was an amazing experience.
Right here, in the gray. Thank you all. I have a question. Well, you've all had longevity themes in your art forms, and I was curious in terms of resources and funding, whichever, if you had a unique experience in terms of a solution to a creative problem-solving kind of situation in terms of resources or funding. So, how do you make it work, basically?
Every trick that I've ever tried, and I try 80 that I've tried that haven't worked, and I just keep trying because I'm going to do it, but how long is it going to take to get there? And so I mostly operate Freewaves on grants, and I mostly do my own work for free, and then I teach to make a living, right? And that I really wanted the bus project to go, and I really wanted it to be enormous, and I wanted it to be a year long. So we are going for corporate sponsors, and we're having radio ads and social media and the bus videos, and the subject's going to be health. And it's taking all of those elements together, and it's taking 1 year of fundraising to make it happen. And I think it's just proportional to the amount of desire to make it happen, and just keep flipping over, okay, that didn't work, what would work, the next. And the other is that I also feel like every individual and organization sort of has access to different resources. And so I have a 25-year history of a nonprofit. I can use that system, right? But what system do you have? You know, do you know rich people? Do you have a river that you can work with? You know, like, what resource do you have? And then how to take that resource and leverage it into more resources.
As a solo performer, I was greatly supported by the Mom Foundation for the Arts. And the Sister with a Decent Straight Job Foundation for the Arts. But I'll speak for Great Leap. Great Leap is a nonprofit arts organization. Not doing anything different from anybody else, really. You know, we beg from anybody. And you know, recently the whole crowdsourcing, the Indiegogo Kickstarter, which people are very quickly starting to reach their saturation point on. Trying to find partnerships with the city of Los Angeles recently. We're doing all this environmental work. We did all this project with Ciclavia, the last couple ones. And Nobuko Miyamoto at this very moment is in Washington, D.C. meeting with the NEA and all these other folks. So, you know, it's kind of the same old, a lot of it, for us, seems to be boiled down to like, stay hopeful, don't get discouraged, even though it's incredibly discouraging. You know, that seems to be half the battle, is to just keep your spirit up, and you know, don't let it get you down. But right now, there doesn't seem to be any anything new. You know, Kickstarter's old now, so and nobody seems to know how to get a hold of all these, you know, Jerry Yang or any of these other many billionaires. So
Let's say vote.
Vote in November, yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I can add is credit card debt, I think. Because trust me, I've been paying that off for years, and it was just, you work so that you can do other jobs outside, and if you can manage the finances perfectly, you won't be in a huge amount of debt, but you know, you work it off. And yeah, I mean, hard work. I was gonna say Kickstarter, and then Dan got that one. That's the only other thing I could think of. Yeah.
So we have time for one more question, and it's going to be from Crystal.
I heard the term measures of impact earlier, and I was hoping that maybe you could speak to what are your personal measures of success in community projects.
For the arts, I feel like it's really difficult. And all I've been able to do is the survey with the bus riders is just the beginning of sort of investigating that. And I do find that I had to work with social scientists to even design how I would ask it, where I would ask it, who would I ask, what are the questions. Like, I was terrible. Like, I think the arts are so subjective, and this impact testing thing is very, you know, objective, and so we are the worst designers of impact materials, and I just recommend you really work very hard with someone in another field to figure it out.
My initial response is that as an artist doing things in the public, I think you always want to have that experience of like somebody comes up that like you've never seen before, and they like give you a pat on the back, and they're like, oh, you know, that such and such a piece had a really big impact on me. That hasn't happened to me. Hopefully it will one day. I don't know. The only thing I can think of in terms of impact is that sort of while I was building something, somebody being like, oh, that's really cool. That makes me happy, and that's about as far as I've gotten so far. But that works for me.
I measure on a few levels. One, there's just the art itself. Okay, what did we create? Yeah, that was good. You know, that was a fucking good show. And then there's the other level of success or impact, which is, okay, what impact did it have on the people who experienced it? Okay, people they seem like they really appreciated that, you know. And then the other level is, okay, the other participants in the project, my collaborators, for example. Well, it's a great show, but that guy hates my guts now. And that, I take that very seriously. You know, like if I do a great project, I make a fantastic performance, but our relationship got all fucked up, it's not a success to me. You know, to me that it's the human relationships are as important as the product that we make. So, you know, I kind of measured on those levels. I never measured on how much money I make, because that would be really sad. But, you know, it's like, it kind of goes back to the resources question. Like, God, I just do this because I just love doing this. I don't care if I don't have any money. This is like, I can't believe I get to do this with my life. I get to make art. You know, where creativity is the main focus of your human life. That's like, wow, you know. So that's how I measure it. I certainly don't measure it by reviews in the newspaper or anything like that. And I'm super self-critical. So I have to like throw that factor into my judgment of success, because you know, you walk off the stage and you say, oh, fucked up that monologue, I messed up that dance, you know. And how do you not let your desire for excellence, how do you not let your criticalness cheat you of satisfaction of what you're doing? You know? And that goes with whatever your field is. There's always places where you fall short, things didn't work well. And so this is my motto. Always pleased, never satisfied. Try that on.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. We'll begin our transition, and you guys are welcome to stay and join us or be on your way, and we'll give you a moment to kind of exit the stage. I'm not graceful, sorry. But thanks again, let's all. Our next activity is building our own creative place. We're gonna get a little arty, and Joanna's moving our objects into the center of the room. So can you guys, let's self-divide into groups of 6. So I'm going to do the count-off thing that we did earlier, and then we'll let you know what's happening. Dialogue sparked through creative placemaking. But we're going to begin the share out. Is group 1 right here ready? I did interrupt you mid-flow, but are you guys ready? And the idea about this share out is that we'll have about 25 minutes for the entire group to share out about some takeaways that you guys discussed for the day, about your piece, what that evoked. You can essentially sum up anything that your group has experienced in the last 20 minutes. And then we have one final activity to culminate the day before we go have happy hour. So group 1, are you guys ready? Does somebody want a mic? I could do that. Hello.
Okay, and is their name?
My name's Tanya, and this sculpture that we made here is called, it's actually meant to be viewed from this side, so you'll have to see it later on. But it's called Holiday on Holiday, which means like Halloween on vacation, I guess is another way. So we got, you can't see it on that side, sorry, but big pumpkin, and a baby pumpkin, and there's a cigarette in the pumpkin's mouth, and there's like a shell, and he's at the beach. And lots of things. You know what? If you were in this group, we were talking a lot about it. It was really cool. So just come around and look at it, and you'll be like, "Oh, I see it smoking, but it's kind of at the beach." And then the second part that we were asked to talk about was what we as a group decided was creative placemaking. And well, we didn't really come up with a full consensus. We sort of discussed how creative placemaking doesn't necessarily mean a physical, like you could have a physical space, but I don't know, I'm gonna talk about this, but you could have a physical space, but does that, if something's not happening there, or if something creative is happening there, like can you check that box and say, okay, we've created a creative space for that, or is it something that's more in the mind? So yes. That's what we talked about, and it's a ongoing conversation.
My name is Adrienne Muller, and this is time. Yes. Am I supposed to explain it? We all collaboratively created it. It's multi-dimensional. It goes from coastal ocean to forest. There are life and life cycles in it. I don't know. Anyway, so we could be here all day. So our definition of creative placemaking, well, we neither could come up with a singular definition, and had all decided that we probably are walking away with more questions about creative placemaking than we came in with, but in a good way, because now it's, you might have had one idea of what you thought it was, and now we've expanded that definition to the point where we don't really know where the definition begins or ends. But I think we all appreciated Melissa's idea the most, and she was talking about how it started, her personal placemaking efforts started more on an individual basis, but then kind of led her out into the community. And then by that, she created a musical space with collaborators that could be visited by outsiders or could be passed on. And so that place, I got lost in my own. But that was, we all went, oh yeah,
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and our selection is called Ode to Andy. And we worked with themes like nature and death and balance and oil pollution and what other things came into it. I was told to make it up. Anyway, and I would also say that our group has numerous ideas about creative space making, but we'll tell you about them after we're elected. Now, we actually got so engrossed with our project and collaborating together that we forgot to even approach the question. So I think our experience may show what we think of it, that we were completely engrossed and seemed to be enjoying each other.
Next group might need to assume positions. Yeah, we do. Do you want us to say?
You can show us and then say, because I just told you guys to move, so sorry.
What I think that we were actually doing, and this is only from, it's not
something that you think of before you do it, but it's really just looking at interpreting what we were doing, and I think what we were accomplishing with this was changing the relationship between the audience and the stage. We're creating a new place, and in doing so, and in creating and working with the relationship of the body to the object, we were, as I said, creating a new space, and yeah, and also, in essence, taking over the space. As you'll notice that one of our group is over there by the piano, which is part of the technical space. Here we are.
And also creating a pervasive sound score that
Yeah,
alters the
right.
texture of the part. We're redoing it.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Okay. So, fourth and
right?
Four and.
So we also talked about time. This is called her moment in time because we felt that the red rose was evocative of femininity. And we were talking about things like an event having just happened and being on the beach and children playing. So we had a lot of visual images in our minds. And we noticed that there were two diagonals here of between the pumpkins, and that there were kind of ephemeral, natural objects. So in that way, it was a moment in time. And then in terms of creative placemaking, we each went around and said a word that for us evoked creative placemaking. And those words were togetherness, activation, identity, placement, innovation, and illuminating.
Jasmine Morales, everyone.
Okay, I'm Hasmeen, as Kelly said. Our discussion became somehow very much a discussion about LA. And so we made, the name of our piece is Map of LA, Made in LA. And we have the west side over here, UCLA, of course, the first thing we put on the map. And then we put the upside down shell, the Coliseum, because we don't really want to put USC on the map. So. Just kidding. Anyway, and so we have the hills over here, and we have the valley. Downtown, we sprinkled some glitter on downtown because it sparkles at night. And some of the glitter spilled over onto Hollywood, onto the other side. And here we have the barriers protecting us from all the scary things like Arizona, San Bernardino. And so our brief discussion of creative placemaking became one about creative placemaking in LA and some of the challenges that we face as Angelinos who are buried in our neighborhoods. We don't say I'm from LA. Well, I don't really tell people like I'm from LA. I say I live on the west side, or I'm from Silver Lake, or that sort of thing. That's what people say here. And so we're very ingrained in our neighborhoods. And when we talk about creative placemaking, we often talk about it in reference to specific neighborhoods, like Boyle Heights, for example. And so Boyle Heights, of course, is going to be a very enriched neighborhood, but one that might also be very disconnected to other places in LA or the world in general. And so that's kind of what our discussion was about. What else did we talk about? I don't know. So yeah, creative placemaking as Angelinos and the challenges that we face.
Thank you. So I want to, before we close out the day creatively, close it out logistically and boringly so that we can end on a high note. So thank you all. First of all, thanks to Atwater Village and Circle X Theater for hosting us. And they're not even here, so we're really just being nice. Thanks to Irvine and Hewlett for funding us. Thank you to the programming committee from the bottom of my heart and the leadership council from the bottom of my heart for putting this together. Thank you to each and every one of you for having the courage to be open and build crazy things and use your voices today, and thanks for coming. Thank you for coming to all of our subsequent events, whether or not you want to. And in a moment, we'll go outside and we'll kind of clean up a little bit in here as a team to make it really fast, and then we'll go outside and have some drinks. But to close off the day, I want to say this is how we'll do it. Each group came up with a title for your piece, your sculpture. So what we're gonna do is, starting with group one and going around the room, the spokesperson from that team is going to say the title of the piece, and that is going to form a cohesive poem for the entire day. And it won't make any sense, and we'll love it nonetheless. Okay, so we won't do this on mic because that will be really, really challenging. So I'm gonna just have, does everyone remember the title? Take 1 minute to remind each other of the title. Oh, and a question.
I have a question for you, and
Sure.
I don't know if it's appropriate. I just wondered what you hoped that we would take away from it.
Well, I'll speak on behalf of the whole committee. I didn't even introduce myself, which was bad. I'm Kelly Chris, the programming chair of Emerging Arts Leaders Los Angeles. And every event, we hope that we will, we have people, much in the same way as creative placemaking is hard to define, emerging arts leaders in Los Angeles are hard to define. So we try to fly a little higher and use, instead of, we will do a branding workshop in January, but for our creative conversations, we try to fly a little higher and find a topic that will appeal to an architectural researcher like Laura Ng in the room, and then an arts administrator at a theater. And that's not talking about research strategies or theater games, because then we don't have any cohesion. So we talk about subjects that might be a little bit more challenging to apply to your individual career, and we allow you to kind of come up with the creative gap in between. And this topic sprang from the fact that we felt like we didn't necessarily know what creative placemaking was, and that it's a huge topic in the artmosphere right now. And I came up with the word artmosphere.
We do our one word around, can we try to speed it so it's like a...
Yeah, I love that idea. So we'll just do it once, the poem, and then let's do it again until we feel like it sounds like a poem, and that can be as many times until we get bored, but we should definitely go drink. Okay. Let's have group one start off our poem.
So, holiday on holiday.
Time. Ode to Andy. Autumn cycles.
Per moment in time.
Belly.
Holiday on holiday.
Time. Ode to Andy. Cycle.
Per moment in time.
Machiavelli.
Holiday on holiday.
Time. Ode to Andy. Autumn cycle.
Per moment in time.
Machiavelli.